Good evening to you all, and welcome to this third History and Heritage presentation on the history of Scotland's oldest lodges. And this evening we are very pleased to welcome Brother Ken Ross, the Master of the Lodge of Melrose St John No. 1 Biz, who will give us a talk on the history of the lodge very shortly. However, can I first ask that you please remain muted and that you have your video working. I'd like now, if I may, to introduce one or two of our guests this evening. In particular, of course, Grand Master Mason, who has joined us again. I'm delighted to say very supportive of the work of the History and Heritage Group and of these presentations in particular. So, Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, thank you again for your tremendous support. Ken Ross, of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, is our speaker this evening. And we also have Brother Tom Jessup, who is the Chairman of the Information and Communications Committee, and a past substitute Grand Master. Other members of the History and Heritage Group this evening are, as I mentioned a moment ago, Charles Winston, our Secretary, and Brothers Alistair Henderson, Dr. Douglas Nichol, and Gordon Meekie. Others who have joined us this evening, I'm delighted to say, are past Deputy Grand Master, Brother Ewan Rutherford, our current Senior Grand Warden, Brother Alexander Moncrief, and I'd like to welcome from deepest, darkest England, Brother James Bartlett, who is a substitute Provincial Grand Master in Gloucestershire. Welcome. For those who have not heard before, let me just quickly give you an idea of the objectives of the History and Heritage Group. We have an extensive, if demanding, remit, but basically it's to identify, collate, record, preserve and promote the history and heritage and culture of the Scottish craft. And I know that I speak on behalf of all the members of the History and Heritage Group when I say that we are delighted to be involved in such a project. And this series of presentations, brethren, on the history of our oldest lodges is designed to remind our audiences that Scotland does have the oldest lodges in the world, underlining the fact that Scotland is the home of modern Freemasonry. Brethren, this evening's proceedings, as you will be aware, are being recorded and will be available to view tomorrow on various Provincial Grand Lodge Facebook pages. And I would ask our host at this stage, Brother Charles Winston, if he'd be good enough to make sure that everyone is muted. The history of the Lodge of Melrose St John No. 1 Biz will be undertaken by Brother Ken Ross. He will be introduced by the Grand Master Mason, but before I do so, I'd like just to remind you to hold any questions until after the presentation. We will have a question and answer session at the end, and I would ask you, if you have any questions, perhaps you could be good enough to post them on the chat room, and of course later on, if you do have another question, please raise your hand so that we can identify you. Now I'd like to introduce the Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, and again my grateful thanks on behalf of all in the History and Heritage Group for your constant support to our group. And I would ask you now, sir, if you would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Brother Ken Ross.
Thank you very much, John. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be back with you again this week. And if I could extend my own personal welcome to each and every one of you. It's good to see the familiar faces. And I think tonight we have one or two that haven't been with us before. So a very special welcome to you to this series of lectures. This is our third week. We started off in Ayrshire. We moved last week to Edinburgh. And this week we are going a wee bit further south down to Melrose. And it's my privilege and pleasure this evening to introduce to you Brother Ken Ross. Ken left Airdrie when he was 15 years of age. He left Airdrie High School and spent his time as a structural design draftsman with Baines of Coatbridge. And subsequently, Ken gained a civil engineering degree. As a young man, he took a one-way boat ticket to Norway, and he lived in Stavanger for some 10 years working in oil and gas engineering. He returned to the UK, to Coventry, but worked in Libya, Australia, Brunei, again in oil and gas, before becoming a university lecturer in operations management for 2 years while studying for his MBA. He then spent a further 12 years as a project manager with Westinghouse Rail Signalling. Masonically, Ken started his career in rugby, in Rokeby Lodge number 4118, and became master in 2005. He also attained the chair of Lodge Academia in Warwick. In retirement, Ken has relocated to Newstead in Melrose, just some 300 yards from the old original lodge, where he affiliated to the Lodge of Melrose St John number 1 Biz, and he has been the master of the lodge since 2017. Ken is also involved in the Provincial Grand Lodge of the Scottish Borders, where he is the Provincial Grand Jeweller. Brethren, could I ask you to give a very warm welcome to Brother Ken Ross.
Thank you, Grandmaster Mason, Brother Ramsey McGee, for that fine introduction to our speaker this evening. I'd again just take this opportunity to remind everyone to keep their videos on and please remain muted. And I would invite Brother Ken Ross, if he would care now, to undertake his paper on his lodge, the Lodge of Melrose, St John number 1 Biz. Brother Ken Ross, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Most worshipful Grandmaster and brethren all. Before I begin, let me read an extract from Gould's History of Freemasonry. It says, prior to 1880, no history worthy of the name of Lodge Melrose St John has ever been presented. This was partly owing to the difficulty of obtaining access to its musty records, and in some degree, no doubt, to the fact that the custodians of these documents not entertaining a very clear idea of what has been confided to their charge. Well, I would say that if they'd actually contacted our Lodge Secretary for £10 plus post and packaging, they could probably have got a hold of the history of the Lodge of Melrose. But it was quite interesting to read that Gould's History, 4 volumes. It's quite a bit of detail he's got. We were asked by the Grand Lodge of Scotland History and Heritage Group to give a talk about the history of the Lodge of Melrose St John number 1 Biz, and it is my pleasure to do so. It may well be that Brother Gould is right, and that before we disappear as a lodge, that our musty records are properly examined by a competent historian. And the reason I say competent is because I believe that anybody that looks at any Masonic records should be a Freemason so that he or she, well, he could understand exactly what it was he was looking at. Some people have looked at our records in the past, but I'm sure that some of the items have gone over their heads. As an early lodge, I have presumed that much of the interest shown concerns our early days, and I have therefore concentrated on that aspect of the lodge history and not on the latter. For those of you who don't know it, the small market town of Melrose is located in the Scottish Borders. This quiet place next to the River Tweed grew up around an ancient abbey and is famous for inventing seven-a-side rugby. The Lodge of Melrose St John has been an integral part of the town. It has been active and visible within the community here for many centuries. Although our earlier lodge brethren believed that the Lodge Melrose St John dated from the year 1136, let us clearly say from the outset that at this time we cannot state with any certainty that when the lodge was formed. We are, however, firmly convinced that our founding lodge members were operative masons who worked on the building or reconstruction of Melrose Abbey and had settled locally. It is virtually impossible to talk about the early aspects of our lodge without appreciating the events affecting Melrose Abbey, and I must therefore run through a history of the Abbey. Could I have image 1, please, Brother Charles? The next one. St Mary's Abbey, Melrose, was founded in 1136 by King David I of Scotland. This was the first monastery of the Cistercian order in Scotland, which initially had an abbot and 12 monks. They had come from the Cistercians' great northern English missionary base in Yorkshire, who had in turn come from Dijon and Burgundy. These monks differed from the other Masonic orders, as they forbade meat, furs, and fine cloth, they shunned wealth, carried out manual labour themselves, and opted to strictly follow St Benedict's rule. As the monks themselves did not have the necessary skills to design and build the abbey, they most probably did as we would do today. They would have contracted out the work. This was common practice at that time in the explosion of ecclesiastical building, which was happening throughout Christendom. The Cistercians would likely have approached a builders' guild, college, or other body to design and oversee the work. It is therefore very likely that the original craftsmen were European, itinerant workers of various skills. One source of research believed that the masons brought from Strasbourg to build Holyrood Abbey in 1128 travelled southwards to build Kelso and Melrose Abbey in 1128 and 1136. Because the monks carried out manual labour, they had a cheap source of labour, and they embraced new techniques such as grange farming. The monks developed Melrose wool as a quality brand, which was exported via the great trading ports in Northern Europe. As a consequence, the abbey enjoyed a period of great success. This and the attraction of their austere spirituality helped their order to grow and become very wealthy. By 1143, the progress had been sufficiently advanced for the building to be dedicated to the Blessed Virgin and St. John. The east end of the abbey was completed in 1146, and the other buildings in the complex were added over the next 50 years. The abbey was built in the Gothic manner in the form of a St. John's cross, and they enjoyed 170 years of peace and prosperity, during which the abbey enjoyed royal patronage and favour. Much of their wealth went into improving and enhancing the abbey. In 1322, Melrose Abbey and the town that grew up around it were attacked by the English army of King Edward II. Much of the abbey was destroyed and many of the monks were killed. Petrus de Mine, now remember that name, Petrus de Mine, architect and mason, was employed to rebuild the abbey by King Robert the Bruce, who instructed £2,000 to be made available from the Roxburgh district coffers. I tried to actually work out, using net present value, how much that was worth, but the records didn't go back anywhere near as far as that. But £2,000 in those days would have been an awful lot of money. The abbey was completely rebuilt, and the foundations of the Lay Brothers Infirmary were added to the solarium. It was built, it was destroyed, and then it was rebuilt. 63 years later, in 1385, the abbey was burned down by the army of Richard II of England. 4 years later, a contrite Richard granted the abbot compensation by reducing the duty on wool which was exported through Berwick. An extensive and complete restoration commenced, which took about 120 years, carried out in 5 stages. This was distinguished in the stonework itself, and it was still unfinished when King James IV visited in 1504. In 1540, there were 130 monks in Melrose, and guess what? In 1544, Henry VIII came along and torched the place. So here again, it was destroyed for the 3rd time. In 1559, the last abbot of Melrose Abbey, James Stewart, who was the illegitimate son of James V, died. In 1560, following the Protestant Reformation, the abbey ceased to function. Its carvings were smashed by a Protestant mob during the Scottish Civil War, which followed the deposition of Mary Queen of Scots. Finally, much of the abbey was carted away by local people who were looking for building material. The cloister and the church were allowed to fall into disrepair and were eventually used as a quarry. Then in 1590, Melrose's last monk died. So in essence, we have an abbey which was famed for its beauty and its craftsmanship, which was built, destroyed 3 times and reconstructed twice, and all before 1544. This would have required generations of stonemasons and other trades, and we know that some had settled locally. Now, this is quite crucial because this is where Melrose differs from the other lodges, because we had not just years, but very many decades where rebuilding, restoration and enhancement work was ongoing. In the 222 years from the abbey first being destroyed in 1322 to the last desecration in 1544, there would have been almost continuous work for the stonemasons. And I worked another way. If you look at it from this perspective, it would have involved at least 8 generations of stonemasons, if you take 30 years as an average generational value. As with many other long-term medieval work sites, it is not unreasonable to speculate that the stonemasons carrying out the work in the abbey formed themselves into an operative lodge to regulate the trades, identify proficiency, allow advancement, to arbitrate disputes, and to provide benevolence and charity to their members and their families. But what is there to support this? Well, as a starting point of reference, one of the facts that we did have was that we knew that in 1674, 85 masons of the Lodge of Melrose signed an agreement prepared by Andrew Main. Petrus de Main was the name I gave you earlier. In 1674, Andrew Main prepared the regulations. Out of these 85 masons, 32 were Mains and 15 were Bunzes. The early lodge was dominated by these 2 families. Our records show that our first non-operative mason was initiated in 1670. The lodge members must have therefore, before then, been operative masons. So I decided to look through some non-Masonic records to see if the Mains or the Bunzes were mentioned anywhere else. We knew that the lands around Melrose were occupied by the craftsmen who worked on the abbey or vassals who worked on the Abbey Grange farms. As it was reputed that the village of Newstead, which was originally called Newstead, which is a mile from the abbey, attracted many of the stonemasons, I therefore reviewed the Newstead charters, which provide very accurate dated records of the disposition of the parcels of land. In many cases, they also confirmed the trade of the beneficiary. These records that many were to masons as feu tenants. In Scots law, that meant that they retained a right to the land, providing they continued to pay an annual fee. The earliest written reference to these kindly tenants I've found so far in the Drygrange Charter shows that they were in possession before 1540. For Newstead, these kindly tenants were dominated by the Mains and Bunzey families, and extremely detailed records show that the smallest portion of land allocated was 2 acres and the largest was 12 acres. These feu tenants paid annual fees in stipulated quantities of barley, oats, oatmeal or peat. Nearly 100 parcels of land in Newstead were allocated between 1540 and 1606, with the Main and Bunzeys being the most predominant. Following the last destruction of the abbey in 1544, the financial standing of the abbey was in peril. There followed what was known as the spoliation of the abbey, where deans were appointed to manage the day-to-day functioning. These records show that, amongst others, a Thomas Main was a dean of the abbey in 1557. The Melrose Regality records show that on the 14th of February 1568, Robert Main, a mason in Newstead, had sufficient social standing to act as a legal witness for the transfer of large parcels of ownership of the Newstead lands, which had been previously again granted by the monastery. In 1587, all the abbey lands were in possession of the Crown, and to pay their debts, the commendator of the Crown, the Earl of Harrington, awarded parcels of land to the abbey creditors, which eventually ended up in the hands of the McClure family, much of which they sold or portioned off. And now we come to image 2, which is in front of everybody. This is our old lodge room. In 1613, the Mean family home was built in Newstead and used as the lodge room. The old lodge room was correct to the mason's compass for the purpose of the lodge meetings and had RM 1613 M with a gavel and chisel engraved in the door lintel. This building existed until 1891. Could I have the next image, please? The stones of the old window and sundial stone from the house were relocated and built into our Melrose lodge room. That's in our lodge room just now. Could I have the next image, please? A portion of the original land in St. John's Wynd, which is only 300 yards from where I'm sitting, is still owned by the lodge. Could I have the next slide, please? Since 1931, the offers of the lodge gather there in June in full regalia at a well-attended public ceremonial, where the master receives the lodge mall from a descendant of the Newstead Masons. So this was in 1947, and you can see the number of people that were present at that. And these people here who are holding the mall in the top picture, he's actually a descendant of the Newstead Masons who presents the mall to the lodge master. Could I have the next slide, please? And there you are. This was last year, so this is still going on now. Every year we get together and they present us with the lodge mall. And ironically, that was supposed to happen on Saturday past, the 20th of June. In 1618, the destroyed Melrose Abbey had a portion of its roof put on and paid for by the Masons of Newstead. Part of the Abbey's church was converted into a parish church for the town. In 1624, Andrew Mean, Mason in Newstead, died, aged 63, and he was buried in the Mean family plot in the Abbey grounds. In 1670, the first non-operative Masons were admitted to the lodge, and in 1674, the lodge minutes were begun. These early lodge records show that the lodge office bearers consisted of a Grand Master, a Deputy Grand Master, 2 wardens, a treasurer, 2 box masters, 2 acting stewards, 4 standard bearers, a clerk, a tailor, a Bible bearer, and 6 stewards, which was a total of 22 officers of the lodge. In 1675, a mutual agreement of the Masons of the Lodge of Melrose was signed at Newstead by 85 members. One item of significance being that it extended apprenticeships from 4 years to 7 years. But by this time, men of other trades such as maltman, weaver, vintner, and hostler were being initiated into the lodge. Most of them, however, were coming still from the families of the Means and the Bunseys. In 1683, the Earl of Harrington granted Melrose St. John permission to add a gallery to the Abbey for lodge use. In 1739, the company of the ancient Lodge of Melrose found that 3 of their number, by their own confession, had been guilty of entering a certain person on an irregular day. They were fined £8 Scots each and had to provide a pair of gloves for every member. And that meant each of them had to buy about 80 or 90 pairs of gloves for the members of the lodge. So it was quite a serious incident. In 1742, the lodge meetings were transferred from Newstead to Melrose and were initially held in hired rooms. In 1745, all the members were required to attend the Grand Master of the lodge to walk in procession to the general place of rendezvous. All were required to wear clean aprons and gloves. In 1765, the regulations for the Honourable Society of the Masons of Melrose were approved by the members. And it was interesting, I thought. Admission would only be granted to persons of a blameless life and conversation, free of open scandal such as cursing, swearing, lying, drunkenness, Sabbath breaking, and other such like abominable practices. I wonder how many of them would get into a lodge in these modern times. In 1772, a set of new regulations in the lodge was agreed that formed a benefit society within the lodge. Any brother who had 5 years standing who died would receive £2, or if his wife died, £1. Any brother of 3 years standing could make an application for box funds in the event of his falling sick, lame or blind. The widow or dependent children of deceased members were entitled to receive a 20-shilling one-off payment. Could I have the next slide, please? In 1791, new lodge rooms in Melrose were built, and this is them. It was quite interesting when you saw some of the beautiful murals that were on the wall. They'd made a really lovely job of the lodge. It hasn't really changed much in terms of shape or size, and the fireplace is still there. In 1796, a set of new regulations for the Brotherly Society of Masons of Melrose were agreed by the brethren. One interesting item being that a member had the right for the use of the lodge mort cloth at his funeral, or to borrow the society's mort cloth if he needed to bury his wife, father, or mother. And you could only presume that the mort cloth had the lodge logo and so on it. It was also agreed that all members would be entitled to sit in the lodge gallery at Melrose Abbey Church. In 1861, the lodge rooms were rebuilt to accommodate a shop in the ground level. And we still have that shop today, so we have a good source of income comes into the lodge every year, most of which we give away. In 1879, on the 27th of December, at our lodge meeting, installation meeting, there were over 100 members at the installation meeting and the torchlit Masons walk to the Abbey. And it was memorable on that occasion because the weather was very inclement. In 1891, after several approaches from the Grand Lodge of Scotland over a period of 104 years, and upon the 8th consideration, the Lodge Melrose St John members voted 69 for and 20 against for the Lodge to join the Grand Lodge of Scotland. At this time, the Lodge of Melrose St John had operated as an independent lodge for a documented period of 217 years and for an undocumented period beyond that. This made Lodge Melrose St John the last of the early Scottish lodges to come into the bosom of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. In recognition of our claim of the antiquity of the lodge, we were allocated lodge number 1 bis. In the Grand Lodge of Scotland records, Lodge Mother Kilwinning number, is it 0 or nothing? Lodge of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel number 1, and the Lodge Melrose St John number 1 bis, and of course Aberdeen is 1 ter. Ironically, these lodges have the foundation date stated as 1598, which was 8 years after the last monk of Melrose died. Prior to 1891, as an independent lodge, the Lodge of Melrose St John issued warrants and charters to form other lodges and awarded Master Mason certificates to affiliated members. Could I have the next image, please? And here you can see a copy of a blank charter which they would have awarded to somebody. The next image, please. Yeah, that was in 1876, a petition. Well, I think they blanked it out for the purposes of displaying it up here. Could the next image, please? This was a beautiful secretary's box or writing box, which was presented, as it says, to Right Worshipful William Scott. I don't know what he did for his unprecedented success during the time he was the Grand Master of the Lodge. I'm hoping that this will spur some of our brethren to present me with a beautiful rosewood writing box when I go. Could I have the next image, please? In any discussion concerning British Masonic history or antiquity, much is made of the importance of written records and lodge minutes. Quite rightly so. The requirement to keep written records was stipulated in the Shaw Statutes, and this helped matters without doubt. But as anyone who has visited Rosslyn Chapel will know, the stonemasons themselves had other ways of communicating. This being through the architecture itself, the use of coats of arms, masons' marks, and inscriptions left in the buildings. It became very common for sponsors or benefactors to the edifices to have figures or statues made in their likeness. Lucy Baxter, under the pseudonym of Leader Scott, in her 1899 seminal book, The Cathedral Builders, observed that in the 14th and 15th centuries, the practice of acknowledgement or personalization on religious buildings had become common practice. She also emphasized that the consistency and the spread of architectural styles and structural techniques throughout Europe pointed towards an unprecedented sharing of knowledge in masonry. As well as figures, coats of arms, marks, and statues, there are two significant inscriptions on the walls of Melrose Abbey. The picture in front of you was the Lodge meeting. I think it was 1911 that this was held. And that is just where one of these inscriptions actually is. Our Lodge coat of arms, could I have the next image, please? Our Lodge coat of arms is a copy of that which is carved on the west wall of the south transept of Melrose Abbey. The coat of arms is attributed to John Murdo, Morrow, or Morville, who likely later became Murray. Now, what a mouthful that is. People changed their names. It was absolutely crazy. People also named their sons after them. So you'll find somebody called John Smith would name his son John Smith as well. It's just led to an awful lot of confusion. I'll say this bit again because it is quite significant. The coat of arms is attributed to John Murdo, Morrow, or Morville, who likely later became Murray the Elder. He was a Parisian-born medieval architect responsible for overseeing ecclesiastical works at Paisley, Glasgow, Nithsdale, Galloway, St Andrews, and of course at his home in Melrose. The continuous store door lintel, could I have the next slide, please? Here we are. This is a photograph of a book, that's why it's so poor. Had I been able to get into the Abbey, I could have got a proper photograph of this. So I apologise for the quality of the picture. The continuous store door lintel with the first inscription is most peculiarly shaped. As you can see there, the bottom portion is a slab and the top portion has been cut in a keystone. The coat of arms is two compasses, slightly opened and crossed in the manner of a saltire. There is a fleur-de-lis on each side and one at the base. Excuse me. The compass is for the builder's trade. The fleur-de-lis is for France. The inscription is, so gaze the compass even about, so truth and law to do, but do it. Behold to ye hend John Morville, which is translated as the compass goes round, true and loyal to its centre, so without doubt, truth and loyalty shall be maintained steadfastly, have regard to the end in all things. Could I have the next image, please? A doorhead leading to the belfry on the south front of Melrose also has the following inscription. John Morrow, sometime Callet was I, and born in Parsi certainly, and had in keeping all mason work of St Andrews, ye High Kirk of Glasgow, Melrose and Paisley, of Nithsdale and of Galway. I pray to God and Mary Beth that sweet St John keep this haly kirk frae scathe. The two carvings on the walls of Melrose Abbey concerning John Murdo, Morrow or Morvo, caused great excitement, speculation and debate in the 19th century. A thorough research on this work was made by the Glaswegian architect Peter MacGregor Chalmers in 1895, which I commend. This could be significant. The coat of arms and the name John Murdo on an antique board in our lodge pronounce him as having been our first Grand Master. Could I have the next slide, please? This is the south transept which he actually designed, and it's probably the most famous part of Melrose Abbey because it's so different from the rest. Anybody that's involved with architecture comments that this is in the French style. So here we have something that somebody's left behind which speaks words. Could I have the next slide, please? This is it's a very, very dark board. Could I have the next slide as well, please? And it actually says, you maybe see it down the bottom, John Murdo, first Grand Master of Lodge Melrose. And the next slide, please. All right, we'll come to this one. Now, this is significant because John Morrow's first work at Melrose was believed to be in 1463, and his last was in 1505. So if he was our first Grand Master, I will say those dates again. 1463 was his first work in Melrose, and his last was in 1505. And he did a lot of other things in the other Glasgow and Paisley and St Andrews. The first inscription on the abbey is attributed to Morrow himself, the second to him by his grandson Murray, who was also an architect. In our lodge room, a duplicate of a copy of the old charges is displayed. These were copied by hand by AM, which is presumed to be Andrew Mean, over 4 days in December 1674 from an English version dated 1581. It is possible that the version being copied was already in the lodge's possession, but more likely that it had been borrowed. And that's why he did the whole thing in 4 days. The 1581 version is listed as, I'll just read this out. This is from Gould's Freemasonry. Lost sight of from time immemorial, a most unfortunate circumstance, as, if it had survived, it would be the senior of the Grand Lodge of England charges. 1581 was the date on the original charges that was signed, and the document ends, John Winchester, his master Freemason, witnessed that Roger Winchester has done his duty to the science of masonry, dated 1581, in the reign of Sovereign Lady Elizabeth, the 22nd year. There are only 2 copies of these old charges in existence, and they follow the usual format, which was a blessing, narrative on how the science of masonry was founded, a description of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, the history of masonry, and then it gives charges for all masons to keep in faith of what is worthy. The next item in the lodge history was that during the Napoleonic War in 1803 to 1815, French prisoners of war held locally were allowed to conduct their Masonic meetings and their benefit society meetings in our lodge rooms, as well as to participate in our torchlit Masonic procession. And this is what this image actually is. A roll of the members of the French Lodge St. John, dated 1814, contains 11 Melrose brethren as honorary members. Could I have the next slide, please? We continue to hold our installation of the new master and office bearers on St. John's Day, 27th of December. This is followed by the Mason's Walk, a torchlit procession of the Masons in full regalia from the lodge to Melrose Abbey and back. Many townsfolk attend this event, which is headed by a pipe band. Could I have the next image, please? Our lodge records refer to complaints having been made in previous years to the participants setting off fireworks. In the Abbey, in the Abbey ruins, homage is paid to the stonemasons who built the Abbey and an oration given. Image 22. Could I have the next image, please? Okay. This explained the orations given to explain the link between the Abbey and the Masons of Melrose. Here you can see this would have been the original banner that would have been displayed when they were doing their processions as well. The procession returns to the lodge after circling the town cross 3 times, which is intended to present the new master to the townspeople. The lodge records show that we've held the torchlit procession without break for 275 years and make reference to it being held previously to that. During both World Wars, the procession was held during the day so as not to contravene the blackout regulations. Out of personal curiosity, I spent a bit of time trying to find out why the Means and the Bunsies disappeared from our lodge membership. A search of the Melrose Regality records and the Newstead charters throw up at least 3 possibilities. In the 1680s, the Means in particular, and to a lesser extent the Bunsies, were being brought before the local court to answer charges of holding illegal and blasphemous religious meetings and services, and for their failing to attend church. Where this was denied, they were required to obtain and present documented proof of good character from other prominent members of society. If the good character was vouched for, they were usually let off using the wand of peace. Where there was no denial or the accused were unable to secure support for their good character, guilty defendants were usually fined. Non-attenders were always fined and cautioned. Now, this could indicate that the Means and the Bunsies, for some reason, were breaking away from the Protestant Church of Scotland, or were being subjected to some form of religious persecution. The same Regality records show that there was no love lost between the Means and the Bunsies. The Means used the Melrose and Edinburgh courts against the Bunsies in 1672, in 1674, in 1676. I'll just read what the charge was. Out of causeless hatred and malice, daily molest and trouble the complainers in possessions of their lands by causing their bestial pasture on and destroy the complainers' meadows and grass, trespassing on their grounds, and making passage through the same, eating and destroying their trees, cutting peat and fuel, and threatening their lives. Who would want neighbours like that? The Newstead charters show that in 1679, many of the few charters which had been granted by the Abbey were revoked, and ownership of the small holdings in the Melrose area reverted to the Crown. Charles, the Earl of Harrington, instructed the few tenants in the local areas to vacate their properties by Whitsun, 1679. Now, this directly affected 7 Mean and 3 Bunsie families in Newstead, and may have driven many of the small steaders away from their land. The surname Mean probably became Mingus, who possibly relocated to the Highlands around that time. The surname Bunsie became Bunyan, which is a good Scottish border's name. In his book, The First Freemasons, Professor David Stevenson states, in no case is there any evidence whatsoever of continuity between these semi-permanent medieval site lodges and the lodges of Freemasons which emerged in the 17th century Scotland. We are sure that the past and present brethren of the Lodge of Melrose St. John would take issue with that statement, because we believe that the records which identified the Abbey Masons, the charters showing the disposition of the property to these Masons, the documented involvement of these Masons in their community in the Melrose Regality records, the inscriptions on the Abbey, the accepted existence of the lodge in Newstead, the transfer of that lodge from Newstead to Melrose, and the existence of the Melrose Lodge to date show that on at least this occasion, one operative site lodge transitioned into a modern, free and accepted or speculative lodge within the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Could I have the next image, please? This is very close to our lodge rooms now, which still are obviously the same as the previous image, except that the fireplace has been blocked over and there's been a bit of titivation going on. This isn't a great big fancy lodge room, brethren. This is a small lodge room, very difficult to do perambulations and so on. And in actual fact, this picture has been taken from a small gallery which is upstairs, where probably about 12 brethren would be able to sit. In my involvement with the lodge, that gallery has only been used on 2 occasions. So, in summation, I would say that the medieval stonemasons who founded the Lodge of Melrose St. John were not part of some secret society who were skulking in dark corners. For hundreds of years, they paraded through the streets of Melrose, funded the town improvements, attended dedication ceremonies for the municipal buildings, and they sat in their dedicated section of Melrose Abbey on a Sunday, and as now, practiced benevolence and charity in their community. There were no princes, dukes, aristocrats, famous authors, scientists, or high-ranking military officers, just ordinary masons from a rural area. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Brother Ken Ross, for that very detailed and well-researched history of Melrose Abbey and the Lodge of Melrose at St. John number 1 Biz. Thank you. Very interesting history of both the Abbey and, of course, your own lodge there. And I have no doubt that there will be any number of questions. And I would invite Brother Charles Winston, if you could perhaps just organise those that have come through on the chat. Thank you, Charles.
No questions so far, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do we have any other questions, Brother?
Brother Tom Wood is asking where the wearing of top hats originated.
Don't know. We do have lodge top hats up in the gallery, sitting there on hooks. We actually don't wear them in the installation. We wear them for the Mason's Walk. And it was such a scramble for these things. You were very, one year I got one, it was like a pea on a drum, far too small. And after that, I went onto Amazon and bought my own top hat for the walks. That way I'm guaranteed at least every year I'll get one that fits me.
Brother O'Donnell is asking, what is the oldest minute of the lodge?
The oldest minute's in 1674. The Shaw statutes stipulated that records had to be taken. Obviously, our brethren didn't consider that applied to them, and they didn't even bother doing any. That was round about, well, I don't know, I can't remember the date of the Shaw statutes, but it was a considerable time before that.
1598 was the first and 1599 was the second. Did the lodge receive copies of the Shaw statutes, and do they have copies?
Probably not. Probably not. In fact, one of the I made when I was talking about us joining the Grand Lodge, I said that on 8 occasions we considered it. One of those occasions was where a member of our lodge was asked to contact Grand Lodge to find out what the rules and regulations were, which he did. He contacted Grand Lodge, and the reply he got back, rules, I'm not sure we have any. And that's what our brother had to report back to the brethren.
And Brother David Hale from Lodge 1712 is asking, is there any record of where the lodges chartered by Melrose are situated?
No, don't know. And the reason for that just now is because talking to our brother secretary, we have a sealed firebox in the lodge, which I can't get access to, which has got various items of correspondence. I did anticipate that would be one of the questions asked. We believe that there are still at least two lodges that were given charters, one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, but I've still to confirm that.
And Brother Gordon Meaky is asking, what is the star beyond the banner on the wall in the last image?
Charles, that was on behalf of Brother John Benny from Lodge number 588.
Could I have
earlier in the
a
chat.
look and see? Could I have a look at the?
Yes. Is that the image you're looking for?
The one previous to. No.
Oh, back away.
No. No, I think you're going the wrong way.
Charles, it's beside the banner on the very last picture taken from the gallery.
Right. This one?
On the left beside the
there's
banner.
a five-sided star. I do remember in the Lodge history book it was saying that I actually on the master's sash collar, there's a five-sided star medal on there as well, a jewel that's on the sash as well. So I don't know what the significance of it is. I don't know where it's actually come from. But that's a metal, that's actually cut out of metal. I do recognise it. I don't know the significance of it.
Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you, Brother Charles. And again, thanks to Brother Ken Ross, the Master of Knowledge of Melrose St John number 1 Biz, for his work this evening. And from those, albeit few questions, quite a number of points raised that I think you might want to go away and have a look at. I'm not suggesting you do, unless you want to, of course, but I know that your researches aren't finished yet as far as you're concerned, and a few good questions there that I'm sure you would like to find answers to for yourself and to disseminate amongst the brethren this evening. Well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Can I just thank everybody for their support this evening, for their attendance, and in particular, of course, Brother Ken Ross for his presentation, but our Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsey McGee, an exceptionally busy man, and it's great that he's able to give his time for not just this evening, but the two previous history and heritage presentations, and we hope that he continues to do so. It's very, very much valued. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is scheduled for a week this evening. That's Thursday, 2nd of July, again at 7 p.m, brethren. And this time it will be the Lodge of Aberdeen 1 Ter. And our speaker that evening, who I know is with us this evening, Brother Alistair McIntosh, past master, and a past provincial Grand Master of Aberdeen City. So we can look forward, I think, with great anticipation to Brother Alistair McIntosh's presentation a week tonight on the Lodge of Aberdeen number 1 Ter. The link, of course, will be shown, I think, Monday at the latest.
Yes.
Yes. So the link, brethren, you'll have it early enough, and hopefully you can get it into your diaries and make yourselves available for what I'm sure will be yet another very, very interesting presentation. Just before we close down, we'll leave the situation open mics, if you like, if anybody would like to add anything or say their hellos, cheerios or whatever before we actually close down. So the floor is open to you all.
Well, can I just start off by saying thank you very much to Brother Ross, and can I thank each and every one of you for coming along this evening to participate in the presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Well done, Brother Ken. It was an absolutely superb lecture.
Yes.
Well presented. Thank you very much.
Very interesting.
Well done, Ken. All the best.
Cheers.
I believe someone was asking the conditions for recognition of regularity by the United Grand Lodge of England.
Thank you very much, Brother Ken. Very enjoyable lecture. Thank you. Stay safe, brethren.
Thanks again. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Brother Ken. Excellent evening tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ken. Thank you, John. Great evening. Love to join you next time. Take care.
Hope so.
Thanks very much, Brother Ken. Enjoyed that.
Thanks very much. Excellent lecture. Bye just now.
Okay then, Brian, if you've all had your say and said your cheerios, etc., can I again express my thanks to you all for your support, and again, merited thank you to Brother Ken Ross, and of course to the Grand Master Mason. But have a safe journey home, brethren. But thank you, very much appreciated.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brother Ken.
Thank you very much.